Who would you say you think is the most prominent character in the book of Genesis? We think about Abraham. We think about even Adam, Noah. If we were to judge by the amount of scripture in the book that's taken up with his story, we would recognize that it's Joseph. Joseph is a fascinating character in the Old Testament story, and we're going to look at his life this morning in our lesson together. 12 of the last 13 chapters of the book of Genesis are dedicated to telling us about his life. In chapter 12, God gives Abraham the promise that he will have a land that will belong to his people, generation after generation. Establishes a covenant with his people through Abraham that he will fulfill. And then it begins telling us the story of Abraham's life, and then his son's life, and his son's son's life. But the last part of the book of Genesis takes us away from Abraham's family, takes us away from the land where they were sojourning and living, to a faraway place to tell us the story about one of Abraham's descendants, and that is Joseph. The providential work of God in the life of Joseph cannot be missed. In fact, that's really where the story of Joseph concludes. In chapter 50, we'll notice, is talking about the fact that God's been there all along, doing what Joseph didn't recognize he was doing. So as we talk about Esther and providence in our Sunday morning class, and we've spoken about how God works sometimes even in an unseen way, it seemed fit for us to take some time and talk about the story of Joseph. We're going to have, the Lord willing, some lessons on providence, and I believe looking at Joseph's life as groundwork for that study in understanding how God works over periods of time in people's lives. We may be familiar with the story of Joseph, so some of this reviewing here is going to be just that. But it begins in Genesis chapter 37. Joseph was the grandson of Abraham. He was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and the oldest of 2 sons that were born to Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. If you have 12 sons, and maybe some of you do, but if you have 12 sons, it would be hard to treat them all alike, wouldn't it? 12 of them, treat them all alike. But if you're a good father, you would try, wouldn't you? You'd try to show equal love and affection. You try to give them comparable gifts and so on. You ever done that? Maybe for your kids or your grandkids, okay, I'm going to buy this kid something. That means I got to buy this kid something. That's got to sort of be even out some way. I don't want anybody to think I love one kid more than another. Jacob didn't even try. He didn't even try. Joseph is his favorite. And as his favorite, he gives him this multicolored coat in chapter 37, verse 3. Now, a garment is one thing, but a garment with one color is a great gift. But if you're able to secure a garment in Jacob's time that is multicolored, you have a very expensive item. For him to give that to one of his sons was a clear indication that he loved that son very much. And it presented this aspect of Joseph's brothers, the environment from which envy would grow, and they grew in chapter 37, verse 4, to hate their brother. And then there were the dreams. Joseph told his brothers that he dreamed about he and his 11 brothers binding sheaves in the grain field, and then all of a sudden his sheaves stood up, and those sheaves bowed down and worshipped his sheaf. And then later, he dreamed another dream about the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowing down before him. Such an obvious element of the story of homage to Joseph from his family that his father rebuked the presumption. In essence, I believe said, don't tell any more of those dreams around here. Your brothers don't like it. His brothers hated him more and more every day. How much did they hate him? Well, Joseph sent by his fathers to check on his brothers in Dothan. And it tells us there in Genesis chapter 37 that he went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. They conspired against him to kill him. I have 3 brothers. I don't ever think they wanted to kill me. Maybe. I don't think they conspired to do it, and I know that I never conspired to kill them. There might have been some times when I would have sold them all for the right price. And there was definitely a little sibling rivalry going on between us 3. But can you think of hating your brother so much that you'd be willing to kill him and hide it from his father the rest of his life? Reuben intercedes in verse 22 and 23, tells him not to kill the boy. It's not to our advantage to do that. The brothers cast Joseph into an empty pit. Judah then suggests that they sell their brother to some Ishmaelite traders, and Joseph then is on his way to Egypt as a slave. What a difference one day can make. When individuals act upon their hate, their hate and their inclinations to hate, people's lives can be changed forever. In Genesis chapter 37 and verse 28, it says, they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. So here's that transition from the text of the story of Abraham's family sojourning in the land that would belong to them, and now all of a sudden we are transferred. It's like the scene goes over here. Joseph is on his way to Egypt. And the text of Genesis follows, except for the chapter about Judah and Tamar, the text of Genesis follows Joseph into Egypt and accounts his life. So there's something there for us in that Old Testament text that would so consummate itself on Joseph's life that speaks to us not only about what God has already told us about, and that is the promise to Abraham, but I think very specifically how God would behind the scenes bring about his purposes and save his people. So Joseph's brothers pocket the 20 shekels of silver, about $20 or $200 in our $20 a shekel, about $20, $200 I think. And they dipped his favorite coat in goat's blood. They told their father that they found it, and there's that question, that intriguing question to their father, is this your son's robe? As though they didn't know who actually had the multicolored robe maybe that they had dipped in the blood. Is this your son's robe? I think we recognize it. Jacob grieved and refused to be comforted. Now, if Joseph's story starts here, if this is where we leave him here, what could we expect? If you don't know the rest of the story, what could you expect of Joseph's life? How dedicated would he be to God? How consistent would he be in his service to God? Would he be able to retain any of his heritage from the standpoint that he learned before? He's alone. There's no one else around him that's serving God. There's no one else around him to tell him about God. He's been betrayed by his own brothers, and maybe his thinking is that he's been betrayed by his father, who has not, up to this time, you see, any time, come to get him. So would Joseph serve a God that he maybe cannot learn much about in the context of those who claim to serve God being the very ones who has betrayed him? You know, there are a lot of folks who say, well, I would be a better Christian, but my family is just so bad. I've been treated by people that are Christians just really bad. I just don't think I can do that. And then he's lost every vestige of his inheritance and his prosperity. If there was hope that he would, on down the line, be able to inherit a land he'd heard about and be able to have a place of his own, as his father would have a place of his own, all of that was gone now because he was a slave in Egypt. So the person says, well, I served God once, but what did it get me? I was a Christian once, and it didn't seem to help anything. In fact, things got worse. And maybe they give up. Maybe what we would expect of Joseph is to adopt an attitude that God really doesn't care about him, or to adopt an attitude of hopelessness that there's simply no way to get back what I've lost. I can't possibly regain that, and therefore I am always be dissociated from that. I will not go there again. Would he ever serve God? And yet Joseph's life, of the lives that are depicted to us in the book of Genesis, is punctuated by a faithfulness that's undeterred. In fact, there are bad things said about Noah, and there are bad things said about Abraham in terms of the aspect of times they fell away, times they weren't focused on God, and they sinned. But where is that about Joseph? Unless we include his presumption in the dreams and his arrogance in times of his youth, there's no mention in Genesis after he becomes a slave in Egypt where Joseph gives up on God. God is always there for him. Now, not up front in miraculous ways, but there for him. Take a closer look. In Genesis chapter 39, Joseph ends up as a slave in the house of an Egyptian named Potiphar. Now, Joseph is a good servant. He's a good slave, probably efficient at what he does. The text would seem to point in that direction. He does the best that he can, and in verse 2 it says there that God blessed him. God's response to Joseph here is no different now that he's a slave in Egypt than it would have been had he been in his own father's house. But Joseph then is pictured in the text as someone who is successful and he's good looking. And Potiphar's wife notices that, and she sets out to seduce him. And what follows then in Joseph's life in the text of chapter 39 is this test. This test of whether or not, you see, he will remain faithful to God. And the test comes in the form of a woman who would seduce him to do that which is immoral. And Joseph consistently turns her down. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and says, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He's not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. That is profound to me. That in those short verses we get such a deep, intimate look at what lies within the heart of this man who'd been betrayed by his own family living as a slave in a foreign land. Was Joseph connected with God? Was God a part of Joseph's thinking here? And what if it had not been? How easy it would have been for someone in Joseph's position to give in to the seduction of Potiphar's wife, to feel that somehow he deserved it, or that somehow you see he was entitled to it, and none of that took place. In fact, you see his reasoning on that is just the opposite of that. He says here, I will not betray my master. I can have everything in this house except you, and he has you as his wife, and I will not take that. And then it concludes by bringing God into the discussion by saying, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? You see, there is this aspect here of okay, I'm wondering what's happening with my slide, but I won't worry about that. There's a sense in which, you see, God has not in any way lessened in Joseph's thinking, but rather is becoming very applicable in how Joseph would make choices. You know what I think about this when we go from chapter 37 to chapter 39, it gives us this glimpse of Joseph as a slave in Potiphar's house, of this singular temptation, is that how many other times in the context of Joseph's life up until this time did he make this very same reasoning? Is the text telling us here that this is not just one isolated event, but that when Joseph was making decisions, his perspective was, I cannot sin against God, and I cannot sin against other people. I have to keep myself morally pure in this. And so he displays more than just a desire to do the right thing. It's more than just in the conscience of a moment, oh, this is right and this is wrong, therefore I'm not going to do the wrong thing. But rather, he says here, if I can get what he's doing here, he's displaying the aspect that he's living with an ongoing consciousness of God. That God is there ever before him. An all-seeing eye is watching over him, that God sees and that God knows. And maybe more importantly, in the context of Joseph, God really cares about whether or not I make this choice or that choice. We can be convinced because of difficult times, because living in a place that doesn't submit to the authority of God, a countercultural situation, we can be convinced that God really doesn't care because seemingly nobody else does. Joseph knows that God cares. You know, I sang a song when I was a child, oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. Be careful, little tongue, what you say. Be careful, little hands, what you do. There's a Father up above, looking down in love. Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. The idea of that song was to teach children not only that God sees everything, God knows everything, but God cares about what you do. Joseph, you see, this young Joseph understood what the prophet Jonah did not understand. And that is that the God of Israel is not jurisdictionally challenged. The God of Israel is not one you can hide from or you can move out of his territory where he's no longer involved, that you're not under his jurisdiction any longer. Jonah thought that somehow there was some way he could escape the command of Jehovah, but he was wrong about that. And Joseph understood that in Egypt, even in Egypt, God was seeing him and watching over him and caring about him in every way, even though there was no one around him to reinforce that. You believe that God sees all? That you cannot get out of his jurisdiction? Sometimes that is a subtle challenge to us. People act different on vacation than they do at home. Sometimes they do. People move away and go to college and think somehow things are a little more freer here than they were before when I was back home. It can be a challenge for young people to think that somehow because they get outside the physical eyes of their parents or their community or the church, that they can live the way that they want, and what they need to be convinced of is what Joseph knew all along. God sees me wherever I am, and God cares. He's going to know what you did in the back of a car. He's going to know what you did down by the riverbank. He's going to know what you do at the church house. He's going to know what you do in your home. He knows what you click on your computer and all the sites that you visited. God knows all of that. Now, I don't know if that frightens you or thrills you, but we need to take notice of that and recognize there's a consciousness of God that's sort of to be a part of the Christian life. As we grow older and as we grow deeper and more intimate with him, it will become even more important to us. I believe it's one of those elements that starts out maybe when you're young and you're struggling to be something that frightens you, challenges you. When you get older and you recognize the fact that God sees and he's there and he cares, becomes something that is so thrillingly comforting that it surpasses everything else. God's there, and he knows. The proverb writer said in Proverbs chapter 15, verse 3, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on evil and good. 139th Psalm, the psalmist asks, Lord, you've searched me and you know me. You know where I sit down and where I stand up. You understand my thoughts from afar away. You observe my travels and my rest. You are aware of all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know all about it, Lord. You have encircled me. You have placed your hand on me. This extraordinary knowledge is beyond me. It is lofty. I am unable to reach it. Where can I go to escape your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I live at the eastern horizon or settle at the western limits, even there your hand will lead me. Your right hand will hold on to me. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light around me will become my night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night shines like the day. Darkness and light are alike to you. Darkness and light are alike to you. That's thrilling to know, isn't it? Sometimes I can't see in the dark. God doesn't have any problem with that. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 13, no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. Now, let's fast forward to Genesis chapter 50. This is, I think, to some extent where the, the connection we want to make with the aspect of God's working in Joseph's life is most prominent. Genesis chapter 50, Joseph is second in command in all of Egypt. And he's been reunited with his brother and his father. They all now live in the land of Egypt. He's brought them to save them from the lack of food. You remember what transpired earlier than this in Potiphar's prison? As he was thrown in prison because Potiphar's wife, you see, accused him of something he hadn't done. And while he's in Potiphar's prison is when he meets, you see, both as prisoners, a baker and a butler that served the Pharaoh before. And they said to him, we each had a dream, and there is no interpreter. So Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please. I would underline there the idea of God. Still there, isn't it? Joseph's still thinking about the things that God is doing and God can do that no man can do. So when these guys make known their dreams that no one can interpret, a puzzle, a mystery, Joseph's thinking is there are no mysteries for God. Interpretation of dreams belong to him. Tell them to me. And so they provide the dream, and Joseph provides the interpretation. And it turns out just exactly the way Joseph said that it would. In chapter 40, verse 21, and he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in the Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker as the Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Joseph remembers God, brings God into the equation to answer the question about the mysteries of the dreams, but he's still a prisoner in Potiphar's prison. He's still a prisoner that has been forgotten at the end of the story. And he's betrayed and forgotten again for a whole 2 years. And then Pharaoh has a dream that no one can interpret. 7 fat cows come out of the river, followed by 7 skinny, ugly cows, who proceed to eat the fat cows but don't get any fatter. 7 good heads of grain are followed by 7 blighted, terrible heads of grain, and the 7 blighted heads of grain devour the good heads. Who can interpret this? And the butler remembers Joseph. In Genesis chapter 41, verse 6, it is not in me, God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So he's put on stage again before the Pharaoh himself to interpret dreams, and Joseph is not so presumptuous to say, yeah, I got those other 2s right, I can get this one right too. He says, God will give a peaceable solution to you for this dream. And he tells Pharaoh about 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh says, who can I find to administer my government during those times in which you see there is so much when we have nothing on the horizon coming? And the Pharaoh says, Joseph, how about you? You be that one. Verse 38, can we find such a man as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all of this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Pharaoh puts his ring on Joseph, a royal robe on his back. Maybe it was multicolored. A gold chain on his neck. And he puts him in charge. Now that brings us, you see, to that comparison we said earlier about Mordecai, his great honor that was placed upon him to be one who was in charge of the administration of a foreign government so that he could bring about the purposes of God because he was seen to be someone, you see, who was wise and understanding and cared about the people. What a difference a day makes. And as much as there was a change in that day when he was thrown into that deep pit, there's a change made in this day when Joseph interprets the dreams of the Pharaoh and he's exalted to this position of honor. And so during the course of the great years of plenty, he secures food for the land of Egypt, is able to be reunited with his brothers and bring his family back to the land of plenty in the time of famine and saves them from starvation. Jacob lived 17 years in the land of Egypt after he is restored to his son Joseph. And he died at the age of 147. When Jacob died, the sons of Jacob, the other sons of Jacob, began to worry. Is it possible that Joseph has not taken revenge upon us for what we did to him simply because our father was alive, but now our father is dead? Are we in danger now? And they were afraid. Chapter 50, it tells us there that Joseph's brothers saw their father was dead. They said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back from all the evil which we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph, saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And his brothers also came and fell down before him, saying, behold, we are your servants. Remind you of a dream? This last look of Joseph is one of the most profound, I think, images in the story of his life. This is the Joseph, I think, that God intended him to be. A Joseph that not only has great power and is an individual that others would bow down to, as described in the dreams that he gave to Joseph when he was younger, but a Joseph that would be able to look on his brothers who had betrayed him with compassion and seek not their destruction, but rather to be able to look at how God works through it all. Would Joseph exact revenge? In verse 19, Joseph says to his brothers, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God?" There he is again. Could I sin against my God? My God is so powerful, he can do anything and even interpret dreams. And now at the end, when he's given the great power to do whatever he wants to his brothers, again, Joseph's mind is on God. And the thing that he thinks is, I am not him. I am not God. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. That last phrase, I'm often drawn to the contrast between what his brothers' attitude towards him was in the beginning of this, when before they sold him into slavery. The text tells us they could not say anything nice to him. They refused to speak to him kindly. You ever had somebody like that? Everything they say to you is derogatory or negative. You realize talking to them for 10 minutes, they don't like you. Joseph had that his whole young life. His brothers hated him. And now he has the chance to reverse all of that and do evil to them. And the text describes him as one who comforted them and spoke kindly to them. He gave them what they did not give him. I'm not suggesting that his brothers were not repentant and remorseful for what they'd done. But Joseph's decision did not seek revenge against his brothers was a submission to the providential work of God. It wasn't just, again, that Joseph said, oh, this is the right thing to do. This is the kind thing to do at this moment. We might all think about that in terms of forgiveness. Should I forgive him or should I not forgive him? I'll take the high road and I forgive him. Joseph forgave his brothers, but it wasn't just this aspect of taking the high road. His forgiveness of his brothers was based upon what all those decisions previously had been based upon, and that is the providential work of God in his life. He realized that God's sovereignty was over all of these things. And this wasn't his choice to make. That God was working in this, and therefore, whether it was good or though it was bad, am I in the place of God? That was a perspective from which he was able to do what he was able to do. And so he did not seek revenge, but returned evil with good because he recognized his God was good. And God had been good. All the time he'd been with him. God had been good to him. So God didn't need Joseph to dish out any justice. Joseph could leave that to him. He could wait on God. In our Zoom class Thursday, we read Isaiah chapter 30, verse 18, where it says there that God waits to show us mercy and that he wants us to wait on him. And someone in the class asked a very intuitive question, and that is, when is it that we are to wait on God? We know that God has already provided mercy for us, so though the proverb writer though Isaiah was saying that Israel should wait for God because he will bring mercy, God's already brought mercy to us. How does that verse apply to us? Because at the end, you see, Isaiah is calling on God's people to wait on him. And I thought about this in answer to that question, that this is one of those times that illustrates that. Joseph allowed God time to work things out. He could have sought revenge against his brothers, and you could seek revenge against those who've hurt you. We can lash out against evil with more evil, and we can try to eke out the justice, or we can recognize that God is sovereign over all of those things, and we wait for God to work it out in his own time. Some give up on God in times of great stress and difficulty. They don't allow time for God to work it out. At any point we can become discouraged, and the call for us to respond to that is a call for us to wait on God, because he is sovereign over all of these things. He can work good things in the context of our bad. I'm not convinced that God maliciously inflicts or taunts any of us with evil, but I am convinced that he allows us to suffer, so to test our ability to wait on him to do what he will do, and ultimately to become better people because of it. So Joseph, you see, waited because he had a conscience of God that went throughout his life. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31, Isaiah said, "Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." One of the interesting things about Joseph at the end of his life, when he's thinking about what lies ahead and what all the things that God had done to him to take him to this foreign place and even move his whole family, now they were in Egypt, he never lost sight of what was revealed in Genesis chapter 12 to his grandfather Abraham, that he would give them a land. He said to the people there, "One thing I want you to do, when you guys pack up to leave this place, because you're going to pack up and leave this place, take my bones with you and bury them in the land that God had promised me." That profound to you? You think that far ahead? You have that much confidence in God's provision for you that that's where you're thinking about, where even though you're in a place that doesn't show that doesn't illustrate that doesn't seem like God's even there or doing anything to bring the promise about, that you're still so thinking far ahead of what God has done and so confident that you say, "I will be there with you when that happens. I'll be there with you. Take me with you when that happens." And they did, didn't they? Took Joseph's bones and they buried him in the land. There's so much more about Joseph's faith. He spent most of his life in a very unfavorable environment to serve God. He stood alone as a servant of Jehovah in an idolatrous country, surrounded by people who did not care about God and did not know about God. His livelihood depended upon, for the most of his life, pleasing those who did not care about God and doing their business. There are many reasons he could have given up. There are many reasons he could have rebelled and said, "I will not do that." But when Pharaoh asked him to help, he helped. He joined in just as Mordecai did for the favor and the goodness of the people in giving God the glory for what was being done throughout the progression of his life. He waited on God to bring judgment even upon the Egyptians in the Exodus. He always was aware that God sees, God knows, and God cares. You willing to take that journey with God? Maybe to a wilderness area where no one's going to care about God, but you'll be able to say, "God's here." And you'll make your decisions based upon your consciousness that God is here, and you'll show morality in your life so that you can influence others to serve God. And in the end, you'll have a hope so strong that you know that when God does what he's going to do, you will be there. He's going to take his people back to be with him. He's going to redeem them, save them, and deliver them. You need to journey with him. Become a Christian this morning if you're not. Repent of your sins and be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, as Brother Ken spoke to us earlier about. Be a part of the family of God, and maybe we can help you do that even this morning. We invite you to come as we stand and sing.